I'm Noam. I'm the community manager with Campaign Lab, and I'm here today to introduce the next in our academic series. Today, delivered by Dr. John Bryden. So I'm going to give a quick introduction, and then I'll hand over to him to give his talk. So John works at the crossroads of politics, computer science, and social sciences. His background is in mathematics, software development, and consulting, where he's delivering technical solutions across a range of sectors. Partway through his career, he returned to academia to complete a master's in computational science, focusing on quantitative approaches to biological systems. His research sits at the intersection of machine learning, statistical modeling, and network analysis, with a particular interest in patterns of social behavior, whether in humans or social insects. More recently, after a fellowship at Newspeak House, he's become increasingly engaged with political data. He serves as the executive director at Indiana University's Observatory on Social Media, studying how misinformation propagates through networks. The combination of commercial software experience, quantitative analysis, and behavioral research gives him a distinctive perspective on the broader social and political impacts of technology. And at present, his work focuses on analyzing social networks, looking in particular at how information circulates within societies and the various ways this shapes lives. Today's talk will be on the intersection of that and the election in the US. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John, and we'll have a sort of questions afterwards. But John, take it away.
Thanks, Noam. I'll just share my screen. So let's see if this is working. Uh, can you see the uh, screen now? Hello? Can anyone hear
Yes,
me?
we can see the screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So I was thinking the thing to do would be if anybody sort of gets a bit stuck or lost during this, just pipe up and ask questions as we go because some of it's a bit detailed and complex. So just say hi and just ask a question. We'll try not to get too derailed on any tangents though. So yeah, just a few of the institutions and organizations I've worked with. So just an overview of what I'm going to say today. We're going to do, I'm going to do a little bit of background on network science. So a little network science 101. And a bit more about dynamic social networks and online communities within that, and some work I've done on that. Before I move on to looking at the rise of Trump, and I'll present what I'm now looking to call the anatomy of a social media political mouthpiece. So, what's a network? Start very beginning. A network has nodes. There's an abstract concept as a node. It represents objects. In the real world, it can represent anything really, but in this case, often nodes represent people. So my examples are Donald Trump and Elon Musk in this particular case, just to pick something topical. So as well as nodes, you have edges, and edges represent relationships between objects. So a relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk could be considered as friends. However, some networks are snapshots in time, and sometimes we want to think about networks as dynamic and changing over time. So in this case, this relationship might stop, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk might not be friends anymore. And a static network can't really capture this change, whereas a dynamic network can. So some of the work I've been doing has been studying dynamic networks rather than static ones. The second concept is this idea of a network community. So I've just done a picture of a network there. It's very abstract. There are no actual people, but you can just see some nodes and some edges between them. But on the left, there's a cluster of nodes that are very connected to each other. And that is something we call a community. I've highlighted that in yellow. Uh, so the idea of a community is that they have more internal edges than external. And that's what it, it's a very vague term. And there's a mathematical definition of what communities are. But in this case, I'm just thinking of it in those terms. Um, it's very simple. You have lots of edges within the communities and few edges between them. Examples of human communities can people can form communities around sports teams, professional environments, religion, which pop star they tend to like. So communities are very common in human society. They're an important way of how we are, part of how we live and organize ourselves as people. Um, so going to are we okay at the moment? So I can keep going on to the next concept I'm going to discuss is homophily. Uh, and this is an idea of how these groups form in the first place. Is with homophily, we tend to bias our interactions towards similar other people. Um, so you might find most of your friends share similar political opinions to yourself. Um, so that's a common idea of homophily, and there are many different ways homophily works based on occupation, interests, geography, ethnicity, all sorts of other factors are involved in homophily. But the basic principle is birds of a feather. Excuse me. Got a frog in my throat. Great. Birds of a feather flock together. Uh, yeah. So that's this idea of people biasing their interactions. Another idea we think about is social transmission, where you copy your language, opinions, belief, and behavior from other people. Uh, and this social transmission is kind of an important mechanism of how ideas evolve and how things change over time. Uh, there's evidence that this exists, but we don't really know how it works in terms of like uh, the underlying principles of social transmission in the way we do understand genetic transmission and those physical processes. I've just got a social copying there, the baby copying the mother. Okay, so I've got these concepts I've introduced. We've got a network, we've got ideas of dynamic networks, we've got ideas of communities and networks where communities are quite clustered together. And based on those ideas, I'm interested in how groups can dynamically evolve over time. So if we take a network and we want to see what the dynamics of groups changing over time is, and then we'll eventually get to it. But how do these network theories apply in real world situations? So can we find communities of people on Twitter, like the communities I've described? And do Twitter groups change over time? Uh, and the first thing we did years ago was to build a simulation of these networks, a dynamic simulation of how networks change over time. So what you're seeing there is a network of four different types of individuals. You've got red, blue, pink, and yellow individuals. And the idea is, remember homophily, that all the people with the same color share similar opinions or something. And the network started, everybody was just rewiring to everybody else. What I've done is change the level of homophily in the simulation. So now, while some individuals are rewiring to other random individuals, we're also seeing how the effect of homophily and how we've got these clear communities, clusters of individuals, which are all the same color. But the other part of this simulation is actually individuals are changing color over time as well. Uh, so, and then there's also this spread from individuals to another, the social transmission of colors to from one individual to another, which is kind of interesting because you get this flow of people between groups. So this is a very, very basic simulation. There's nothing, very little going on. Just four rules, but it sort of does show quite interesting dynamics of groups. Um, it's basically neutral. So uh, let's see if anyone has any questions at this point. No? Shall I carry on? Okay. Um, so there's the idea of, great, thanks, Tim. The idea of these communities that have these strong levels of internal connections. And how the those communities might be represented in the real world. And in fact, what we can do is we can go to Twitter, and we went to Twitter and we looked for these communities on Twitter. And this was like a study of the whole of Twitter in around 2011. It was very early in the kind of life cycle of Twitter, back in the days when we thought that Twitter was like everybody speaking to everybody else. But here you're beginning to see these nodes are communities, and the strength of the links between them is um, how often they retweet each other in this case, I think. Yeah, no, no, not retweet. How often they mention each other in each other's tweets. So this was a mention network. Um, you can see that some of these nodes, like Justin Bieber, or all of the nodes, have very, very strong internal connections between within them, and much weaker connections to the other parts of the network. So we've got this really quite strong community structure on Twitter here, with how people sort of mention each other and talk, have conversations with each other on Twitter. Uh, you can see early days, but there are some political groups. We've got Pelosi, Obamacare, and POTUS around here. There's a British group, Rubbish Reckon, Blimey. Uh, and this was kind of like a map of Twitter in 2011, and who was using it and what kind of groups there were out there. Um, so that was kind of exciting for us to find that. Um, but the next stage was to say, okay, so we've got this big change in the political landscape of um, Trump arriving in 2016, and we wanted to use these tools and these theories to try and understand what was happening with Trump in that particular case. So this is kind of next part two, the rise of Trump. It's like a Star Wars. And there he is on the escalator coming down the stairs. Uh, Still at that point, pre 2015, um, Trump was pretty much the comedy celebrity candidate who came in every 4 years and did a candidacy, and nobody took it seriously. It was like, oh, it's Trump again. Ha ha ha. Um, yeah. So that was the case sort of Trump walked into. Um, but he had low campaign funding. Nobody took him very seriously. Obviously, today he's completely reshaped the political landscape. He's probably the most powerful politician in the world. So there's quite a change there from this comedy candidate to this very important politician. So the questions I'm sort of trying to look at are what the forces were behind this, the drivers. Were there factors like intervention from Russia? Was there a large scale desire for change that Trump tapped into? And what was the role of Twitter amplification here? And can we find evidence of that going on? Um, so a little bit more about Twitter. Trump basically has said himself that he found Twitter to be very effective as his personal soapbox. Um, he actually had 3 million followers in 2015. That shifted to about 13.5 million on the election night in 2016. So he had a big growth in followers. I think he's around 100 million now. I didn't check, but uh, he's got a very significant ability to talk to people from Twitter. He uses he he uses Twitter. He bypasses traditional media, and that means he's able to say whatever he wants to people within some boundaries, but those boundaries are quite limited. He can pretty much speak unchecked to his followers. And it's kind of instant as well. He gets his message out very quickly. So if anything happens, he can use Twitter or he was using Twitter, he still does to get his messages out very quickly and changing the narrative. On top of that, we've got these ideas of Twitter algorithmic biases. So we've got this idea that people with more followers get more followers. In science, we call this positive feedback. So the more popular you get, the more popular you get, is this idea on Twitter. And there's a lot of celebrity culture on Twitter, and people use that to get very popular. And a few people get most of the popularity on Twitter. And that's a factor of the Twitter world we live in. So um, let's have a think about what how we got to apply these ideas of community structure, communities on Twitter, and dynamic networks to what happened with Twitter with Trump's rise to power. So what I did was a study of the network dynamics of people on Twitter. The research questions of that were: what were the different groups of people involved? How was Trump's campaign amplified on Twitter? And is there evidence of outside interference? Uh, so let's have a think about how to build the sample. Um, Basically, what I wanted to do was to build a collection of lots of Twitter accounts to try and understand who was out there and what their kind of political allegiances were. Um, to do that, we developed an innovative sampling algorithm that basically the idea is you pick a count, you download all of its followers and who it's followed, um, and then you look at all the accounts that have been followed and have been followed by other accounts and find an account that hasn't been sampled yet that's most closely linked with the accounts that have already been sampled. And that most closely linked account is the one to sample next. And you do that, we started with the alt-right Twitter account, which was an account that was quite heavily involved in alt-right Twitter because we were interested in the alt-right as well. Um, and we grew around that. We found 250,000 accounts in 2018. So we've got this sample of 2050 accounts, and we 250,000 accounts, uh, and we know who follows whom. So we can build a network of that. And this is the network we found in terms of, again, the communities. So the way to read this is we've got four distinct communities here. Um, what I can do is like when I take a community, so if we look at the sort of community A, conservative, the reason why we know this is conservative and top conservatives on Twitter is because that the accounts in that group are much more likely to have the word conservative in their biographies. Whereas Group B, the Trump group, they're much more likely to have Trump supporter or Trump or hash MAGA in their biographies. You can see again that these communities are much more likely to follow other accounts in the same community. But there's still some links between the communities. And one interesting thing here is we've got this quite more far right, alt right community, which is community C. Um, that follows the accounts in the conservative, traditional conservative, and the Trump communities. However, they don't seem to follow it back very much. I mean, most of the arrows coming out of that group, uh, rather than coming back into it. There are a few, but these are kind of anti-Semita and uh, other groups like that who are obviously not very are quite right wing as well. Um, you've got the UKIP British Brexit group there as well. Um, and interestingly, I think this star group is kind of important because it shows that it's sort of like we got a fairly complete sample of right wing accounts on this sample, and the ones outside of this were kind of more general author marketing social media accounts that are kind of less interesting. So these are kind of this is a sample of the right wing Twitterati, if you like. Um, it's like this body of people who talk a lot about politics, um, and there are thousands of accounts here. There's a more fine grain. So these were like the bigger groups, and we can actually zoom quite far into these small groups. You can see the Proud Boys were there, quite interesting. Um, so there's a kind of interesting, like more narrow Confederates. People talk about masculinity. I think there's Gamergate in there as well. Uh, but it doesn't add particularly much, this figure. So we've got these accounts, thousands of accounts on this map. And we were kind of interested in, we've got some details about all these Twitter accounts. And we know when they were created. So we can look at how these accounts were created over time. Uh, and so we can plot, we're focusing on the three kind of most interesting groups, which was the Trump group, the alt-right group, and the GOP, which stands for Grand Old Party, which is the Republican Party's nickname. Um, and you can see how like different sort of events over time have shaped how mobilizing people to go onto Twitter. And the initial kind of Tea Party movement around 2009, which was after Obama had been elected, there was this big Tea Party movement. So that mobilized a lot of people to start getting onto Twitter. And then there was 2012 US elections, which were pretty bland, not particularly exciting. But you can see the 2015 announcement of Trump getting on the escalator really did change things. Uh, the lots of people were setting up accounts for Trump. They were they were strongly mobilized, uh, and there was a lot of interest in the GOP kind of accounts. Nobody was interested in kind of setting up accounts to support Republican Party. Everybody was interested in Trump accounts. There was a rise in alt-right accounts at the time as well. Um, but as you can see, the purple. So there is a link between sort of Trump and stimulating the alt-right as well. The second thing we can do is this kind of dynamics of who was following whom over time. So one thing is we've got information of um, how people were following other accounts. We can basically got the order of following, and we can look for accounts that have been created. And if you follow an account that's been created after a certain time, then any accounts you follow after that time will have well, you'll know that they have to be followed after that account was created. So we've got this way of inferring when an account was followed. Basically, that's a simple way of saying it, and it gives you a pattern of how follower preference changed over time. Excuse me. um, excuse me. Okay, so we're looking at how these follow how people change their follower behavior. I think the interesting thing here was like how the GOP group, which is the one at the bottom, was they were all following each other, uh, and then that was sort of declining, and then they all just decided, okay, no, we're just going to follow Trump's accounts instead. Uh, so they all changed their following behavior to following accounts in the Trump group. The Trump group steeply were they were following GOP accounts, but they steeply changed and changed to following other Trump accounts. So you can see this kind of evolution and creation of a new group of online community based around Trump here. Um, at the same time, the alt-right group did shift from changing towards Trump, but eh, they're mainly quite isolated, following each other, and nobody else is following the alt-right group. So there is a distinction between sort of Trump followers and alt-right people here that we can find. I did a little video of how this changed over time. Actually, I'll pause that. I think there are just a couple of. Um, so Trump's announcement mobilized a lot of people to move on to Twitter. You can see a new community formed, but it was dominant over the old GOP community. Um, and you can see this sort of happening over time in this little video, which we made of the accounts. And you can see GOP growing because of Tea Party protests. And the sort of Trump group was sort of growing with it, but they were mainly sort of following GOP accounts. You can see this orange line not following back at the time. And then things start to change around 2015, and you can see there's this shift. Trump announces a campaign. There's already growth there, but now there's a massive shift in the Trump group. And you can see now the GOP group is following the Trump group rather than the other way around. Again, the alt-right was a sideshow to this, I think. So one of the questions we asked earlier was there intervention? Did foreign state actors get involved to create this pattern? Or um, what what was happening? So the two types of intervention out there are troll farms. So these were like based in St. Petersburg, the IRA. it's called, and they were stirring up trouble on the internet. And they were amplifying a lot of divisive issues until they were largely found out and banned. Um, Trump did plenty of that himself as well. Yes, I think they may have played a role. I don't know to what extent. We can't measure that. But what we can measure is whether there were automated accounts generated by bad actors. Um, and you'd expect Russians to be doing a lot of that as well as the troll farms. You can sort of use these accounts to amplify people, legitimize what they're saying by agreeing with it. And we use this tool called Botometer to look for automated accounts. Botometer is made by Indiana University and was, well, still is at the time, a very well-renowned tool for looking for these kind of bots. And it has a kind of bot score, and if you're over sort of zero point 0.8, then that's considered to be a bot. Um, so the long and short of it is we didn't find evidence of bots. Um, there are very few counts over the zero point 0.8. There's a kind of natural um, distribution of bot scores that you'd expect just from the tool. And they're very similar to the three groups. And in fact, actually, interestingly, the GOP group showed more evidence of bot activity than the Trump group. The Trump group was found by this tool to be organic and real people in general. And the same with the alt right. It just seems like it's just real people here. Um, so the numbers here, I just dialed back. The GOP had 44,000 people. Trump had 52,000. Those groups, communities from earlier, and the alt right had 16,000 people in it. Um, and they're very low, 1.5% bots in these groups. I mean, maybe those bots were quite active, but I don't think so. Uh, but on total, they had like around 38 million followers, these accounts. So the idea here is that these numbers of followers uh, mean that these accounts were quite active in amplifying everything that Trump said. They'd all retweet it. They'd all, message him. They'd all agree with him. These millions of followers, then output to these millions of followers. So whenever Trump said something, he would. Sorry, there's a message. Was somebody wanted to ask a question?
Well, it was just me saying that the fact that the GOP look more like bots might be because there's like party lines that are sent out. So maybe that looks more like a bot, but actually is just like political discipline. It's just me
Yeah,
musing on that.
it could be that. Yeah, yeah. I think the most of the way a bot's identified is just looking for suspicious um, usernames and things like that. But no, you're right. They do look at a few posts, and if there's a lot of repetition, then yeah, I think yeah, that could well be it. Um, but yeah, so we've got this big amplifier, millions of followers of these thousands of accounts, all like retweeting one person and following what one person's saying. Yeah. Um, so it's a very, very powerful apparatus for getting your message out that has been massively dominant. Uh, so just a bit about what I've been saying. A new movement of Trump supporters who took over from the GOP. The alt-right was on the fringes, and we have the anatomy of a mouthpiece here, the apparatus. Um, and behind that is this basically social media have created this new ways to campaign. An organic movement of people who join Twitter and amplify the messages. and again, getting move people who join and promote one single person's ideas and amplify them. It creates a very powerful movement and a very powerful political entity. The evidence of outside interference is limited. So, just a bit about the take home messages. I'm running out of time. I've probably gone over a bit. Trump went from comedy candidate to powerful politician. And there's a why, how, and who here. Why did he do that? Suddenly there was a gap in the market for him. There's a disaffected population, the future looking bleak, a Rust Belt who lost manufacturing to China. And he spoke a lot about China in his campaign. How did that happen? Social media amplified him, and that shifted the way of campaigning. It wasn't about having a TV media presence so much. He was able to go directly through social media. And who? Well, Trump was the man who his celebrity and other characteristics fit well with this mode of populist online social media campaigns. Um, and we're seeing UK analogues for that. We've got rise of Nigel Farage and Zach Polanski, who are both using populist campaigns and social media to get their messages out. So yeah, there we go. Thank you for everyone. There's a whole list of people who helped out with these projects. So yeah, thank you. So maybe we should move on to
Yeah,
questions.
so big thank you to John. I will take some questions in a second, but I just want to say before I do that we are going to run a poll at the end of this meeting, and we'd really like to get your feedback on how it went. So please stick around for that. It's just a couple of questions, and we really appreciate it. So I will now take some questions if people want to put hands up or type their questions in the chat. I'm very happy to take some questions, but yeah. Tristan, yeah, do you wanna ask?
Hey guys, the in the diagram where we saw the Trump feedback compared to the GOP, was that something to do also with clustering around a single person versus the GOP being a kind of more amorphous concept?
Good question. I did not do the analysis. It's a very good question as to whether there's a more of a hierarchical structure. So there's more about networks as you can look at the structure of a network to see whether a few of the individuals have most of the followings. I think that's a good thing to investigate. Actually, I didn't do that at the time, but this.
I mean, because it might just be because of the nature of like a single person, and suddenly it's able to quite be recorded as one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think
And
there's a
yeah,
lot of in-group following here, so a lot of accounts were all following each other. And I do remember at the time there was a lot of Twitter campaigns for like Follow Friday and all sorts of things. So people all were quite obsessed. Just remembering back now, people were all quite strongly following each other. So I don't think we did find evidence of structure for that. No, I remember right. This was kind of 8 years ago I did this. Um, but yeah, so it's a good question. I think we're not finding evidence of how people follow each other, but there may have been evidence in the way that they retweet each other, which this we don't have the data to study that on this. That would be my answer, if that makes sense.
I also have another question, which is there more recent data for what's happened on X with Trump and the campaign?
Good question. X data is much harder to get than Twitter data. So I don't have access to those data. I do know that I think Trump has this apparatus set up now. He has 100 million followers on Twitter. He has 10 million followers on Truth Social who are prepared to then retweet his messages onto Twitter. So he has pretty effective apparatus set up now. I don't know. Um, yeah, I mean, it just works. I mean, he just gets his messages out.
I'm going to abuse my position as chair to ask a question. I'm interested in whether, so you talk quite a bit about homophily today and this idea that like-minded groups tend to fragment. And one of the things that we've seen is a bit of a platform proliferation, particularly given the Twitter takeover towards X. So, there are people on Truth Social, on Blue Sky, on Mastodon, there were a whole bunch of other ones. And I wonder if the sort of homophilic forces which drive people to move towards sort of like-minded groups might be creating, yeah, I mean, Truth Social obviously has a very explicit political bent, but the same thing could very easily happen on a kind of network basis and make it much harder for these groups to interact. Do you see that? Do you think that's plausible? And do you expect to see further fragmentation in the kind of platform basis, or do you think we might move towards more homogenization? Um,
That's a very good question. I think there were two factors involved in the movement away from Twitter to Blue Sky. One is, as you were saying, homophily, um, which is basically that people were beginning to associate Twitter with a certain uh, core of people, group of people, and wanting to be apart from it. But also, I think there was a sense of like um, Elon Musk having control over the network and having the power
Mm.
to shift the algorithm in particular his own favor, which is this very kind of right wing, those on authority deserve more authority kind of approach. And Elon Musk was very much in for abusing that and has still been abusing that. So people are trying to get away from it. Uh, for me, I think the evidence is that these social media are creating these kinds of super powerful people. There is evidence that they do need more regulation in terms of the way that um, people who have lots of followers get more followers. Um, Coming from a left wing perspective, I think it should be more equitable. There's these inequalities in terms of communication and information online now. Um, so I think that's important. But so people might choose to go to different social networks based on how inequitable they are. And that's a different dynamic to play, sort of political dynamic, as opposed to a homophilic dynamic.
Hannah, do you want to ask about it?
Yeah. Um, my question, no, you might want to mute because I'm sitting next to you. There we go. Yeah, my question is like, I think this is really interesting research because a lot of the time, sort of we as campaigners are like, oh, it's all bots. It's all bots. We can't fight this. It's all bots. Whereas actually your research shows that there was no bots in that whole kind of ascendancy. This was organic people deciding to create accounts in support of a person. And I think sometimes that can be really challenging to those of us on the progressive side because we're just like, it's easier to say it's all bots. So I think in terms of like concrete lessons for campaigners, it definitely signals to us that we need to get more organized, we need to get more people involved in sharing our messages, and that building that kind of organic movement, there is kind of no shortcut to doing that, basically. So yeah, I don't know if you've got any sort of other takeaways for campaigners that you'd kind of suggest
Yeah,
about.
I think I think the who question that I said at the end of why it's there's a who dynamic to this. And I think there's an idea that celebrity culture and influencers and popularity and those getting more popular and those playing the popularity game are very important in the way this particular uh, apparatus, as I call it, social media tools are being used. So I don't know to what extent the kind of progressive movements and Labour have got their head in the sand over this kind of ways of um, campaigning and promoting kind of slightly more narcissistic individuals, or whether that's something that is basically antithetical to progressive ways of movement. And the progressives have to think very carefully about where we go from here, because we're kind of cornered in by this world where to get ahead you have to be narcissistic and big and have a massive personality, uh, and that goes against a lot of cooperative values and giving individuals having too much power and things like that. I think those are important questions for the movements to think about in terms of the way they build these movements online.
So two things. I'm going to launch the impact poll now, but I've also just seen that Tristan put a question in the chat where he asked if you've seen anything about the Mamdani campaign in New York. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that in the context of what's just happened. But I'm
Yeah,
going to
that's
launch the
great.
poll
I
now.
mean, it does seem that there have been uh, there is suddenly a scope for kind of more influential young Generation X media savvy people who are able to get their message out on social media much more effectively. Um, so I haven't, again, I mean, the amount of time and effort to do these kinds of studies is very time consuming. So I can't just quickly knock up an analysis of how Namdani's campaigning was working. But I think that's a very good question. I mean, I think he's an example that is possibly going to be very influential on the left.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank everybody for coming. If there's any last questions, I'll state them, but otherwise, I'll draw the talk to a close. But enormous thank you to John and to everyone who came along today to this.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
Oh.
Take it easy. Nice one.
Just leave the
Cheers.